is Indian country today?
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Tolahungba. Here are two historical events for Wednesday, July 8th, 2020. 50 years ago today, President Richard Nixon released his presidential message to Indian country. In it, he rejected termination policies and supported tribal self-determination. Eventually, it would lead to landmark cases for tribes, including the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, the start of the National Indian Health Board, and the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. This reversed a previous code that had made traditional Indian ceremonies, such as the sun dance, illegal. It was also under the Nixon administration when the Indians into Medicine program was established in 1973. Bobby Kilberg worked at the White House and recalls Nixon's personal connection to Native Americans.
President Nixon personally held a very strong moral belief that federal Native American policy was destructive, it was discriminatory, it was debilitating, and it simply was not right. Forced assimilation and termination ran really against everything in his moral core. He did personalize his beliefs, and in this case, as was just noted, that personalization related to Coach Wallace Newman, his football coach at Whittier College. Coach Newman was a member of the La Jolla Band of the Mission Indian Tribe, and the president said on more than one occasion that the coach had a profound influence on his life and had inspired him and his teammates to be self-confident, competitive, and to never give up. Now, if you go back to those days, that was a long time ago, the president felt that Coach Newman had never given up, even though he was really very much discriminated against. That was a time when Native Americans and other minorities simply were not selected as coaches for major football programs. The president believed that Coach Newman would have been an All-American if it had been a different time, and then he would have been a coach at a Big Ten school if it had been a different time. But that was just not possible in those days. Nixon thought it was terribly unfair, and I heard him say more than once that he promised himself that if he had ever had the chance, he would correct the wrongs against Native Americans on behalf of Coach Newman.
When Nixon released his message on July 8, 1970, he invited leaders from the Taos Pueblo to the White House. In the cabinet room, a room reserved only for visits from heads of state, he greeted the delegation from Taos. Nixon also agreed to return a sacred site to the Taos people. Blue Lake had been illegally taken by former President Theodore Roosevelt in 1906. The land, 48,000 acres, was returned to the Taos Pueblo in December of 1970. Today is also the anniversary of Louis Diwanimaa's historic race at the 1912 Olympics in Stockholm, Sweden. Diwanimaa, a Hopi from the village of Sangopavi, won the silver medal in the 10,000-meter race. It was also the debut of the race in that Olympics. Diwanimaa became Arizona's first Olympic medalist, and in 1924, he, along with all Native Americans, became U.S. citizens. This was actually Diwanimaa's second Olympic appearance. In 1908, he ran the marathon and placed in the top 10. Each year during the Labor Day weekend, there's a 10K race in his honor at his village. A Montana law is blocked after a judge rules it severely restricts the right to vote for Native Americans. The Ballot Interference Protection Act was halted just 2 weeks before the June primary election. The Native American Rights Fund and the American Civil Liberties Union say it imposed severe restrictions on ballot collection efforts that are critical to Native Americans living in rural reservations. The law limited one person to turn in a maximum of 6 absentee ballots. It also limited who could collect the ballots, prohibiting third-party ballot collection organizations that many natives rely on. More than 73% of voters in Montana cast ballots by mail. And now for an update on COVID-19 in Indian country, let's go to our correspondent, Karina Dominguez. Karina?
Leo Senchi Anya, Patty. Leo Senchi Manyavu Getchamalea. We've been tracking COVID-19 cases across Indian country. Here are the latest numbers. There are 12,894 cases. Again, that is 12,894 cases, and there are 531 deaths. Again, that's 531 deaths being reported in the Indian health system. So we actually saw a huge increase at the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. In 2 weeks, they're reporting 128 new cases, and they actually have 3 deaths as well. We're also seeing an increase at the Tohono O'odham Nation in southern Arizona, where they have 54 new cases and 1 new death. That brings their total to 223 and 11 new deaths. And then we also have the South Dakota Cheyenne River Sioux tribe with 15 new cases to bring their total to 27 cases and 1 death. Patty?
We're seeing quite a rise. Karina, thank you so much. And we'll be right back.
This is Indian Country Today.
When the coronavirus hit the U.S., New York was at the center of the pandemic. The governor there took decisive action to slow the spread of the virus. And on Long Island, the Shinnecock Nation is located there. It gained federal recognition in 2010, so it is still fairly new, and it is in the very popular part of Long Island known as the Hamptons. How have the Shinnecocks dealt with the pandemic, and how have they grown since federal recognition? Joining us today is Chairman Brian Polite. Welcome, Chairman Polite.
Okay, Patty. Thank you for having me.
Well, how have you helped your people deal with this global pandemic?
Well, early on, we actually acted very proactively. In the beginning, we banned all travel of tribal staff. We instituted a policy if anybody showed signs of the COVID. And this was weeks prior to New York going into lockdown. After the stay-at-home orders were in place, we were able to provide meals for our community members. First, it was just the elders and the kids, and then as we got more donations and as we received more aid, we actually was able to do a full-fledged food and supply distribution tent where we would give out everything from cloth masks to meals twice a day, to thermometers, to all kinds of things that everybody would need in a time of the pandemic.
And how large is your tribe? What's your population?
Well, on territory, we have 620 tribal members living on territory, with an additional 900 living off territory, and then we have an additional 420 tribal spouses. So we have a population of around 1,000 on 900 acres.
On 900 acres of land. So, in some ways that kind of helps with the efforts of getting in, food and any kind of medical supplies to your people there. And have you had a response from the local communities to help out in any way, or do you need that kind of help?
No, absolutely. The local municipalities have been great. Right from the beginning, the town of Southampton, the county of Suffolk, and also New York State has included us in the county calls that they've had and the leadership calls. We've had local vendors donate food. Panera Bread was great. We had a local Mexican-American spot that provided tacos almost on a daily basis. We had fresh produce coming in. So it really was an outpouring. There was a GoFundMe page that was set up not by the council, but by a tribal member that raised $12,000. So even before a lot of the federal funding was released, we were blessed with kind donations. And we also had money in a rainy day fund that we were able to utilize to provide much necessary resources for our community members.
So a lot of outpouring of help and assistance from the local people and the governments there. Let's talk about your effort to get federal recognition, because again, it was just granted to your nation in 2010. What is that difference like if you were a state recognized tribe and not a federally recognized tribe in this pandemic were to hit? What would those differences be between being state recognized and now federal?
Well, obviously with the funding, it makes a big difference between having state funds and federal funds, or having a combination of both now. We have a sister tribe right up on Long Island, about 30 miles from here. They're called the Uncochog Nation, and they're a state recognized tribe, and we were able to actually help them with some of our federal funding. So it's made a world of difference. If we didn't have the federal funding, especially the access to the Treasury from the CARES Act, things would be a lot different. We wouldn't have been able to actually increase our tribal staff during this pandemic, and we might have had to lay people off. So it's made a world of difference being federally recognized and having access to those much needed funds.
And that is, one of the efforts when a tribe is looking for federal recognition, and what comes with that federal recognition, so that government to government relationship. Tell us about the healthcare system that serves the Shinnecock people.
Well, we have a twofold system. We have a health clinic here on territory. Um, in the upper part, we have what's called Southampton Hospital, which is a local hospital that runs that particular portion through grants from New York State's Indian Health Services. And then in the basement of that, and this is just recently with federal recognition, we now have Indian Health Services, the federal Indian Health Services. So we provide everything from dental care to walk-in clinic care and checkups. And we've been able to actually do on-site testing here with the rapid 15-minute test and also the antibody test. So that's having that clinic here and not having our people have to go off territory to take these tests has been, really a blessing.
That is very fortunate, because so many tribes are struggling with even getting the testing kits, and then having to send those tests off to a lab to have them processed. And so the wait time is anywhere from 2 days to up to a week in some cases. So it is a different story for your people. Now, what about the people who live off the territory? Can they come back and get those the healthcare there?
Absolutely, yes. They would have to, depends on our service area. Our IHS service area right now is limited to just Long Island. So they would have to come back into the service area. With the COVID relief fund that we have set up, though, we are now able to, for the first time in a long time, we are able to actually take some of our resources and provide our tribal members throughout the country and actually throughout the world with masks and soon to be grocery carts. So we're excited about that.
Grocery carts. What do you mean grocery carts?
So yeah, so we designated $400,000 from our CARES Act funding to provide tribal members on territory with stop and shop cards, $400 stop and shop cards for their grocery needs. And the other tribal members that are not on territory will have to call in and submit an application, and they will get a card of their their choice of a vendor that services grocery items.
Oh, I see. Okay. Now, for the numbers in COVID, what is your tribal breakdown? How many people have tested positive? How often are you testing them?
Yeah. So we're testing pretty regularly, almost daily. We just brought back our tribal staff at a 50% capacity. We're actually just last week, we were going to bring them at 100% capacity. But with all the spikes around the country, we reversed course, and now we're back at 50%. All tribal staff have to be tested before they come back, and we're testing them on a 2-week interval. So they get tested twice a month. We've actually been very lucky, and the community took it very seriously. We only have 5 confirmed cases on territory. We had 8 in total, and we lost, unfortunately, 3 of our tribal elders to the COVID-19 disease, but they were off territory, which made it even worse. It's very sad what's going on with our elders when they're placed in these homes, and with the COVID, you can't go visit them, so they have to pass away, and that's horrible. But we've been very blessed, and the community response has been great, and it's allowed us to keep our numbers significantly lower than some of the national averages.
Well, our condolences for the loss of your elders there, because again, that's one population that across Indian country, people have said, this is, if you're going to stay home and wear your face covering, you're doing it for those elders who are especially vulnerable in this pandemic. So I know that's been a push, and the messages again put out there, because there has also been that pushback to not have to wear a face covering when you go out.
Yeah.
What kind of orders have you put in place for your people along those lines, wearing face coverings or anything like that?
Yeah, so actually I have a couple of the face masks. At first we were getting the N95 mask, and we decided we have a lot of good artisans on the res, so we commissioned all kinds of face masks for our members through the food distribution tent. It's mandatory that anybody in tribal facilities has to wear a face mask. We decided that we would make it easy for people with a cloth mask. I don't have any of the really nice native design ones because they went pretty fast. But basically, besides from canceling all in-person meetings in our tribal office, obviously, like most tribes, we're working. Um, a lot of it is virtual. So we are not doing in-person meetings with tribal members. We're working to try to get tribal members more access to Wi-Fi and computers so that we can start doing these meetings for the services that they may need, be it tribal verification letters or what have you, through the internet and through virtual forums.
I think, excuse me,
No,
my
that's
AC kicked on and I got a little bit of dust in my throat here. But I think, computers and Zoom has been a lifesaver in this pandemic in many ways for people to continue to work. But you're also having an effort on broadband for your people.
Yeah, correct. So when we first got the COVID CARES Act, and we have additional funding outside of that, but obviously the CARES Act was the major source of revenue for the relief fund. One of the main guidelines was to increase um, our access to our tribal members' access to Wi-Fi. So what we did was we had the council worked with our local cable and Wi-Fi provider called Optimum, and we were able to work out a deal where we're able to pay for every household's Wi-Fi for the entire year, as well as putting in place a program where every household also gets a computer, and we're also making that available to any of the households, tribal members off the reservation, or off the territory rather, that has children in the house. So in about a month, every single household will have free Wi-Fi and a computer so that they can participate in our tribal meetings, get information, and be up to date, and especially with the kids going into the fall, so they have access in case the schools don't open, that they have access to those computers.
Wow. So again, that's another effort across Indian country. And you're lucky to be in an area that has strong Wi-Fi service overall and not in a remote area that has no infrastructure or very poor infrastructure in that area. So let's talk a little bit about a struggle that you've had with the city there and how that controversy has kind of turned around. And I'm talking about the sign that your tribe put up.
So yeah, last year on Memorial Day weekend, the nation finally finished and erected a 65-foot, what we call a monument, with digital advertisement on it. Our tribal seal now sits 65 feet up in the air, overlooking our ancestral homelands. Unfortunately, as you alluded to in the beginning, you said we're right in the middle of the Hamptons. So with that comes a lot of powerful enemies that have always tried to stop the Shinnecock Nation from proceeding forward on our quest for economic self-sustainability. So when the sign went up, we had basically an uproar with a bunch of hypocritical locals saying that the Native Americans, the indigenous people that have occupied these lands for over 10,000 years, somehow was going to ruin the enclave of the Hamptons because of this sign that looked gaudy and it was horrible. And the DOT, the Department of Transportation, New York State, went as far as to sue us in saying that we violated New York State law. We countered with one, we're sovereign, we have sovereign immunity, and two, that the land in question is not under New York State jurisdiction. That lawsuit is in the pretrial motion phase. We just actually won a pretty big victory with the judge denying the temporary injunction that the state tried to submit. So we're up and operating. But one of the good things that have come from the community out here coming together is that the Shinnecock Nation has been asked and was willing to put up PSAs and public service announcements, not only just for the town of Southampton, but for New York State as well. So the town actually reached out to us, and we're working in cooperation now to get people the necessary information that they need on the billboards. So that whole relationship has kind of flipped on its head, and instead of a lot of locals looking at us and casting dispersions, they're now saying that the Shinnecocks really came through for the local community and played their part.
And so in using that monument and the ability to put out messages on the coronavirus.
Yes, absolutely. Basically, at the height of the New York State pandemic, and you alluded to this before, we were, ground central for the longest time. And the Hamptons, unfortunately, there was a mass exodus from the city. We were actually invaded out here, and it was a really crazy time. All of the rich city people came out here. They bought up everything in the stores. They were all over the place. And at the time, we had to warn people to self quarantine. So that was one of the first signs that we put up for the town, was to put up a message basically alerting people if they're coming from New York City, self-quarantine for 14 days. And then evolved from there for testing sites and so on and so forth.
Wow. So, just it's interesting that evolution of that one particular monument. They fought so hard against it. Now it's actually been used to benefit the entire community. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so it's just this pandemic and how tribes are reacting to it has been very interesting to look at across the nation. What else can you tell us about what the Shinnecock people are doing to counter this pandemic and to ensure that they're safe?
Well, one of the things that we're looking at is the long-term planning, because obviously with pandemics, indigenous people and communities in general don't fare well. This isn't the first time that we've had higher than normal rates in Indian country. So one of the things we are going to do with some of the CARES Act is build a emergency relief center, which will allow us to mitigate some of the damage that some of these pandemics occur. So that center will house a shelter in place area, a commercial kitchen, showers, a food distribution and supply, a lot better than the tent that we were doing it before. So we've put a lot of time and effort, and we've polled our community to see what they want. And that's something that we're very proud of moving forward on, is that relief center, because it's going to be a year-round center, not just for this pandemic, but for other instances of tribal members being in need of emergency relief.
And we're kind of seeing that a lot around Indian country, where some tribes are turning their casinos into, or their hotels connected to their casinos, into areas where people can go and recover from the coronavirus. Because in many Indian communities, there's an overcrowding housing issue. So how can people quarantine and not pass the virus on to other family members? So this sounds like something that can be, like you said, helpful in other situations that may also be natural disasters, such as floods or even fires.
Correct. Yeah. Or snowstorms. We have tribal members that 60% of our population unfortunately lives below the poverty level. So you do have situations in the winter time where you might have somebody who can't pay their heating bill and their heat goes off. This will allow them to come down here and have a safe place to not only get shelter, but to get food as well.
Yeah. So before we go, two things that are happening in Indian country that we're following too. The census count. Has your tribe responded to that?
Oh,
Filling
absolutely.
out the census forms?
Taking it very seriously. We have a whole team in place that's going around. They're actually working in tangent with Stony Brook University, which is a local university on Long Island, to ensure that we're counted. And we're making a big push to ensure that we're counted.
All right. And again, that ties back into federal funding because it's based on population numbers for people living both, I guess, mostly primarily on the territory there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we're driving home, and the team is driving home with community meetings and a lot of social media platform outreach has been great to try to reach those people that might not be in traditional forms of communication or come down to tribal meetings or like that. So it's a multifaceted approach.
And then the other issue, the other story that we're following, of course, is the election. So getting your people to register to vote, and if there's a need to register for mail-in balloting, what is that situation like there for the Shinnecocks?
Well, we don't really have a specific push for registration. Honestly, the Shinnecock Nation always turns out on the local elections. We already have a very high voter registration. I think 80% of the eligible voters are registered and actually actively participate. So we don't have an active committee that's doing something like that right now because we already have a lot of people who are already registered.
Okay, well, interesting discussion. One last thought, Chairman Polite, before we leave.
Sure. I just want to acknowledge all the people that has helped the Shinnecock Nation and also all of the tribal members that are working out there. And I really want to give blessings to those indigenous communities around the country that aren't faring all that well, sending them good medicine and good thoughts and trying to get through this. Because as I said before, we know what this, pandemics can do to our people. And losing one elder in our community is like losing a national treasure. And the fact that this is affecting elders is very troubling. So I just want everybody to stay safe, listen to the medical experts, and take care of your communities.
Chairman Brian Polite from the Shinnecock Nation, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for watching Indian Country Today. Take care of yourselves. Your life is precious. I'm Patty Tolongva. Join us again tomorrow.
This is Indian Country Today.